And when the scribes and Pharisees saw him eat with publicans and sinners, they said to his disciples, how is it that he eats and drinks? So Mark begins, and when the scribes and Pharisees saw him. Matthew says, and when the Pharisees saw it. Well, the it is explained in Mark, him eat with publicans and sinners. So, and when the Pharisees, and when the is the same. And then it goes into scribes and Pharisees in Mark. But their scribes and Pharisees murmured. There, I'll say but when the scribes and Pharisees, because this is an objection that they're making. So I'll say Luke only, but when the is Matthew, Mark. Not there. Scribes and Pharisees is in Luke. Scribes and, it just says Pharisees in Matthew. So scribes and is in Mark and Luke. So dark yellow. Scribes and Pharisees is all three. Murmured. Well, first I have to say that they saw something. Now, I remember, I'm not just going to put it. When they saw it, they said. After that, it would continue on with Luke. Murmured. But in Mark, it's much more descriptive. Saw him eat with publicans and sinners. The word saw is in Matthew, Mark. Now, Mark only. Him eat with publicans and sinners. They, in Mark, they said to his disciples. Matthew, Mark. Luke is just scribes and Pharisees murmured against his disciples, saying, oh yeah, that's better. They didn't just say, they murmured against his disciples, saying, why do you eat? That's good, yeah. They, I'm going to have to put they murmured, because it just says the scribes and Pharisees murmured. But with the explanation, I have to say they murmured. So they from Matthew and Mark, now from Luke only, murmured against his disciples, as opposed to they said to his disciples. But saying is later on in Luke, saying, why do you eat? They said to his disciples, how is it? Why is it? Well, saying the same thing. So I'm going to continue on with against his disciples. Against is from Luke, his disciples. This is all three. Now, Matthew, Mark, just goes into the question because I already said they said to his disciples. Matthew, they said to his disciples. But in Luke, the way that I'm going, it murmured against his disciples. I now have to put saying. I can put the comma from all three first, then from Luke only. Saying and a comma. Why do you eat and drink with publicans and sinners? Mark says, how is it that he eats and drinks with publicans and sinners? Matthew, why eats your master with publicans and sinners? So in Luke, the question is to the disciples, or it's murmured against his disciples, saying, why do you eat with publicans and sinners? The U is not capitalized, so the translators of this version see it as I do, that they're questioning the disciples directly, not Jesus. And they're not even talking about Jesus. They're only asking about the disciples. But that doesn't really make any sense because the disciples are doing whatever their master's doing. So I think I'm going to go with what Matthew and Mark say. Why eats your master with publicans and sinners? Or Mark, how is it that he eats and drinks with publicans and sinners? But it already states in Luke that they're murmuring against his disciples. So the question should be to the disciples, but about their master. Mark has, they said to his disciples, how is it that he? So they are questioning the disciples about Jesus. In Matthew, also, they said to his disciples, why eats your master? So all of them are questioning the disciples, and Matthew and Mark clearly say that they're asking about Jesus, but in Luke it just says, why do you? So I'm going to go with what the majority is. I'll say, why is it that he eats and drinks publican sinners? It's questioning to them. So how to word it? How is it that he, why eats your master? I think that's more clear. How is it or why? So how is it or why? I think in context you can totally understand this verse. Why eats your master with publicans and sinners? But that order is a little strange by itself. Why eats your master? It should be, why does your master eat and drink with publicans and sinners? Well, actually, that's just the way I typically read. But why eats? That's fine. So still, I'm not seeing any one better or worse. How is it that he eats and drinks with publicans and sinners? Why? Okay, there, that answers the question. Matthew and Luke both say why. Luke says, why do you? But I already know I don't want to do that. The question is about Jesus. So I'll say why, and then I think I'll add is it. Why is it? Instead of just why do you eat? Why is it? Is it from Mark that your master? I'll have that. Why is it that from Mark? And then your master from Matthew eats and drinks from Mark. Eat and drink is from Luke, but they don't have the S at the end. I can just say the S is only from Mark. I'll say it's the same word. Why from Matthew, Luke, from Mark only now. Is it that he, but not just he, your master from Matthew. Your master eats is Matthew, Mark, and eat is Luke. So I'll say eats is from all three. And I'll say just the S is from Matthew, Mark, and drink, yeah. Although and drink is not from Matthew. So I'm now going to have to say and drink is only from Mark and Luke, but then the S is only from Mark. With publicans and sinners. With publicans and sinners. With publicans and sinners. Yeah, it's the same in all three. Gray. With publicans and sinners, question mark. Okay, so after that, Jesus responds in Luke, and Jesus answering said to them. Mark, when Jesus heard it, he said to them. That's more descriptive, I like that. Matthew, but when Jesus heard, italicized that, he said to them. When Jesus heard it, but when Jesus heard that. So it in Mark is italicized, that in Matthew is italicized. So not sure. Luke just says, and Jesus answering said to them. But we already know the question is going to the disciples about Jesus. So I'm going to have when Jesus heard it. And I think it makes more sense to have heard it, question, not that. When Jesus heard it. But when Jesus heard it. Or I could say, and when Jesus heard it. That's what I'll say. I'll say and. So this is continuing on. It's immediately after the question. It's not contrary. They're asking the question and he's answering. So Luke only is the word and. When, however, is in Mark and Matthew. Jesus is in Matthew. Jesus is in Mark. Okay, Jesus is in all three. When Jesus. Now it goes into answering said to them in Luke, but I'm not going to do that. I know I'm going to say heard. Heard it. Heard from Mark. Heard that from Matthew. So heard from Matthew, Mark, and then I'll have it only from Mark. He said to them. Matthew, he said to them. Luke said to them. So I'll say he from Matthew, Mark, and then said to them from all three. But there is a comma after it and after that where I would be putting it. So I'll put the comma from both he from Matthew, Mark, he, and now said to them from all three. Said to them, said to them, said to them, yeah. All three in gray, comma, in Luke, comma. Now, what he actually says in Matthew is, they that are whole need not a physician. Mark, they that are whole have no need of the physician. A little bit different. Luke, they that are whole need not a physician. They that are whole need not a physician. Okay, so Matthew and Luke are exactly the same. They that are whole have no need of the physician. Of the physician. There are more than one physicians in the world. I'm going to go with Matthew and Luke. They that are whole need not a physician. But they that are whole are from all three, and then I stop from Mark. They that are whole have no need of the physician. So need is from all three, A is from Matthew, Luke, orange, and then physician is from all three. So I'll continue with need, then I'll have to put A by itself in orange, and then physician back to gray, all three, comma, Matthew, Mark. And then he goes on, Matthew, but they that are sick, Mark, but they that are sick, Luke, but they that are sick. Okay, it's the exact same.